In the last episode, we considered why the Mass is understood as a sacrifice, as the representation of Jesus' one-time sacrifice on Calvary in the non-violent and unbloody manner of the Eucharist. Now we want to consider that in our own time, there are two forms of the Mass, two ways that this sacrifice is made present again to us. And so it is briefly that we want to look at why there are two forms of the Mass, what they are, how they are alike, how they differ, and why it is important that we have both forms at this time. Having answered why the Mass is considered the one sacrifice of Christ, made present again in the sacramental manner as Jesus instituted at the Last Supper, we now want to turn our attention to the rite of the Mass itself. And in fact, a very important element of our contemporary life as church, that the ritual of the Mass can be offered not in just one way, but two, and that there are two forms of our Roman ritual for Mass. This is an interesting development given the recent history of the Church. You recall that in the early 1960s, the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council took place, and during that council, one of the more notable, if not the most notable, element of the council was how the Church wanted to reform her worship, making it more accessible to the people so that they could fully, consciously, and actively participate within it. And it was the enthusiasm and energy of this Second Vatican Council that led to very swift changes in the way the Mass was offered immediately from the Council, beginning in 1965, such that already in 1970, Pope Paul VI issued the Roman Missal with the rite of Mass, or what they sometimes would call the Novus Ordo, the new order of the Mass, in accord with the reforms of Vatican II. And this is what is most familiar to many of us. The rite of the Mass where, among other very key details, we are able to pray no longer simply in Latin, but we can pray in our own common language that we speak in our daily lives. And so it was, 1970, this new rite of the Mass came into play, and it is for 50 years now been at the very heart of the Catholic life. But it was in 2007 that Pope Benedict XVI made an important decision and issued a very, very necessary statement. He recognized that throughout the history of the Church, anytime there was development in worship, such development took place in what we might call, in a technical manner, an organic way, meaning that it grew from natural living of the faith, it grew out of the circumstances of the time, and was never in any way forced, or never was the worship of the Church seen to be the creation or the crafting of human beings, but instead, new elements to the worship were added in or perhaps taken away so as to make it purer or better or more true to what it was meant to be, as an offering of ourselves in praise and thanksgiving to God, as a surrender of ourselves, bowing down in worship, as a participation in the saving works of God that He Himself accomplishes on our behalf. And so it was in 2007 that Pope Benedict did something that was very interesting and important. On July 7th of that year, he issued a very, very short statement, an apostolic letter, motu proprio as it's referred to, called Summorum Pontificum. And in this short document, which I will link to in the description of this video, he expresses how the ritual of the Mass that preceded the Second Vatican Council and was last promulgated in 1962 always had a rightful place of being able to be offered by those who desired such. For there were many who thought when the new order of the Mass came in 1970 that it abolished everything prior. But in truth, the Missal from 1962, promulgated by Pope St. John the 23rd, remained right to be able to offer. And so Benedict XVI, recognizing the importance of not only that was this ritual not abolished, but how this process of organic development is so important and necessary in the life of the Church, issued this statement truly encouraging the regular use of the 1962 Rite of the Mass in parallel with that which was issued in 1970. And in fact, in this document, he chose to give us some new terminology, because we want to talk about in our Roman Catholic Church, and so when I say the Roman Rite, we're talking about Roman Catholicism and what we in the Latin Church would carry out. He wanted to establish that there is one Roman Rite for the Holy Mass, but within that one Roman Rite, there are two distinct forms. What he would term the ordinary form, or the usual form, or the typical form, or that which is common, and then that which is the extraordinary form, that which can be rightly used, but it is used not as an exception so much, but more in lieu of the fact that it is not what is meant to be as common, minding that what was set forth in 1970 is that which is the more commonly used. And so the two forms, the ordinary form, the extraordinary form, were born, at least in terminology, though of course they had well preceded his 2007 statement. But here's what is really at stake here. Pope Benedict XVI, among other truths, recognized that in order for our worship to be fully what it is meant to be, we cannot simply cast out anything that preceded 1970 as though it was old or antiquated or obsolete, but rather we must take from that, and that being the foundation, truly enter into something that is more proper, more worshipful, if we could say it that way, more true, more perfect. And so he renewed the sense of this 1962 Missal being able to be offered regularly, with the end goal of trying to bring in the life of the Church a more proper worship, a more reverent worship, a true worship, and entering into that one-time sacrifice of Christ, as we talked about last time, in a more fitting way, so as to more fruitfully partake of that which Jesus Christ himself accomplishes on our behalf. And so it is that now, since 2007, Holy Mother Church recognizes that there are two forms of the Roman Rite, the ordinary form and the extraordinary form. When it comes to having these two forms, Pope Benedict also recognized that there is meant to be what he called a mutual enrichment. And he speaks of this more in the accompanying letter that he also issued, a letter meant for the bishops of the world, that was given on the very same day, July 7, 2007, and that will also be in the description of this video. Another very short statement from our Holy Father. But he speaks of mutual enrichment, how elements of both forms of the rite can be used to aid the other in becoming more of what it is meant to be. And this is not meant to be some sort of cross-pollination so as to take what's good from one and what's good from the other and form one new rite. No, that is not what this mutual enrichment is all about. But to see each of them with their given integrity, with their given manner of offering the sacrifice, and taking, for example, saints of the calendar that are part of the ordinary form, or what has been celebrated since 1970, taking these and integrating them into the extraordinary form, And likewise, the awareness that people have pleased God, because I have to admit, I don't believe this is universally true, but the awareness that many have attained in worshiping at the ordinary form Mass in their own given language, of what it means to give themselves to God the Father in offering themselves and in sacrifice, bringing that renewed understanding into a worship in the extraordinary form, lest people hearing the priest and seeing the priest on his own at the altar, praying in Latin or praying in a low voice that is inaudible to them, lest they think they are simply there to watch and to wait until it's time for communion, rather than learning to offer themselves in worship, to bring these elements to the extraordinary form. But then, on the vice versa, to recognize the very rich and beautiful prayers of the extraordinary form Mass, that even though they be spoken and prayed in the Latin language, have a depth of meaning that convey this sense of all that Jesus Christ accomplishes on our behalf in his one-time sacrifice, and how we, as members of the body of Christ, the Church, are called to be united in that one sacrifice. Not to mention the beautiful music of the 1962 Gregorian chants, or the beautiful vestments, or the reverence that is demanded, to help integrate these into the ordinary form, which, let's be honest here, has in many places and sectors lacked reverence, lacked attentiveness to the sacred, lacked a sense of mystery that we are encountering the God who created, who is eternal, who is beyond our comprehension, that he is coming down to us in a sense and drawing us up to himself. To integrate these ways of being able to pray and worship in a more fitting manner, such as what Pope Benedict recognized. And so it is true that we live in a very interesting, and I would say very powerful age in the life of the Church, where having received the ordinary form, or Novus Ordo as it's sometimes called, after Vatican II, which sought to draw people into a deeper worship by their own ability to partake more thoughtfully in what was going on, how now we have an opportunity to elevate and to be drawn into greater worship. And so here again, just as I said a few episodes back when discussing Latin in the Mass, to keep an open mind, to not be afraid to come and worship in both forms, minding they are distinct forms. And here is a very beautiful truth that I can speak to in my own experience as one who is blessed to be able to offer the Mass by way of both forms. How in my own standing at the altar, how the one form has informed my awareness and my disposition and my overall manner of celebrating the Mass, what they sometimes call in Latin the ars celebrandi, the art of celebrating. How both forms have informed me in being a priest as to how to more fittingly and humbly and properly offer the holy sacrifice. Like I say, it has affected my way of celebrating in both forms, how my attentiveness at the ordinary form has changed to many of the details of reverence, and how in the extraordinary form, how personal it is. And it is not just a bunch of Latin prayers said incomprehensibly, as sometimes is a criticism that is used to ridicule it, but how deeply prayerful it is. And honestly, as I tell people, how peacefully that Mass can be prayed. These are manifestations of the two forms working in parallel. And so it's a beautiful thing. So I urge you to open your minds and hearts. Check out these statements from Pope Benedict XVI. They're both very, very short. Neither of them is more than 2 pages. And to recognize that we are called, just as Vatican II said, paragraph 48 of Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, that we are to learn to offer ourselves, that we are called to open ourselves to the gift of Jesus Christ that he himself gives us, but then we are to humble ourselves and to learn to be united in that offering up to the Father, which in our case is an offering of gratitude, of thanksgiving, of praise, of true worship, that he who made us and he who desires us for all eternity can take us to himself, and we can share forever the eternal communion for which we are made, which in the kingdom of heaven will no longer be of multiple forms, but it will be forever perfected in the very way that God wills. May God bless you.